Welcome back to Brinth Lab, where we transform obstacles into opportunities and anxiety into strength. And yes, I did get a haircut, thank you very much for noticing. Today we're diving in on a new perspective on anxiety. What if I told you that instead of perceiving anxiety as an illness or as a condition, it should be perceived as a habit? Modern psychology has framed anxiety as an illness or a condition that needs a cure, which I suppose has validity, but at times that can make us feel hopeless. Instead, let's try and see anxiety as a habit, a pattern of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that we ourselves have created and thusly can change. Okay, so what is a habit? A habit is a routine of behavior that is repeated regularly and tends to occur subconsciously. By framing anxiety as a habit, we can see it as something that we can break and replace with healthier patterns. As always, I gotta give a shout to the book that inspired the content of this video, Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz. That book famously says, change your self-image and you change your personality and behavior. So I want to talk about the concept of self-image as it is discussed in that book and how it pertains to anxiety. Firstly, Maxwell Maltz describes the self-image as the mental blueprint we have of ourselves, formed by past experiences and beliefs. Our habitual thoughts are tied to this self-image. If we see ourselves as anxious, for example, we act in ways that confirm this. To break the habit of anxiety, then, we must transform our self-image. For example, visualizing ourselves as calm and brave. As your self-image changes, so will your thoughts and behaviors, reducing your anxiety over time. So just to add on to that a little bit, I think in our lives, and this is coming from someone who perpetually has at times crippling anxiety, we have anxious thoughts and feelings. Naturally, everyone does. But at some point, they turn into a pathology. We start to develop our personality and our self-image around those thoughts and feelings. And then before we know it, we're an anxious person. Psycho-Cybernetics was written in the 60s, and as far as I'm concerned, it's the grandfather of self-help books. But there's a more contemporary piece of literature that expands on the concepts in that book, while at the same time introducing some scientific evidence to back it up. And that is Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself by Dr. Joe Dispenza. This book talks a lot about neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to change and adapt based on new experiences and thoughts. Our habitual thoughts create neural pathways that reinforce anxiety. To break this habit, we need to create new pathways. Through practices like mindfulness, meditation, and visualization, we can rewire our brains to form new, healthier patterns. Breaking the habit of being yourself walks people through how they came to be who they are, or how their personality formed. An understanding of that cycle for me has helped me gain a lot of self-awareness and create positive change. So here's a very simplified visual of that cycle. Firstly, you have an experience. That experience, depending on how powerful it is in your life, invokes emotions. Those emotions might be something that you continually feel over a long period of time, and they're linked to thoughts or thinking. If that thinking and those emotions are powerful or consistent enough, that leads you to come to a conclusion. If that conclusion is something that you carry with you for an extended period of time, that becomes your identity. And then your identity reinforces your experiences. And then the cycle repeats itself. Dr. Joe Dispenza says this a lot, and I love it. But your personality is your personal reality. It's how you see, feel about, and interface with the world. So think about this cycle in the context of an anxious experience that you've had. Remember back to some experience that you had that made you afraid. That brought up feelings of anxiety, right? And then maybe those feelings were so powerful that you never really let them go. So they started to inform your thinking. And we all know how thinking and emotions are tied into one another and reinforce one another. Anxious emotions reinforce anxious thoughts. Anxious thoughts reinforce anxious emotions. You do that cycle for long enough, and that leads you to come to a conclusion. Maybe a conclusion like, I'm anxious a lot. And then you think that enough, and then eventually you think, I'm an anxious person. That experience, emotions, thoughts, conclusion, and identity became your personality. And now that's your personal reality. I'm sure you've experienced this in several instances in your life, but if you think of yourself as an anxious person, then you have experiences that give you anxiety because you're framing them in the context of anxiety. Another person could have that same experience and not be made anxious by it. While at that same time, you can look back on the experience later and go, why was I afraid during that? I really had no logical reason to be. Okay, so if these concepts are true, where do we see them in modern science or modern psychology? Well, therapists use something called cognitive behavioral therapy in their practice all the time. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, aims to change patterns of thinking or behavior that are causing people's problems, and thereby change the way they feel. By identifying and challenging distorted thoughts and replacing them with more realistic ones, CBT helps rewire the brain's neural pathways, similar to the principles of neuroplasticity discussed by Dr. Joe Dispenza and Maxwell Maltz. This therapeutic approach is supported by extensive research and utilized by many therapists, psychiatrists, and psychologists all around the world. Okay, so now we've added some validity to the fact that anxiety can in fact be perceived as a habit, and if it is, perhaps that makes it more manageable. So gang, this video is really just an introduction to this concept. We're going to do a whole nother video where we lay out a process as to how you can break these anxious patterns. But the first step of that is acknowledging that anxiety or any mental health concern to some degree is a habit. It creates habitual thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that reinforce themselves and further progress that state of mind. So before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a sentiment from Dr. Joe Dispenza. When you analyze yourself or your life within a disturbing emotion, you will drive your brain further out of balance via overthinking or overanalyzing. In a sense, you are thinking in the past. An emotion is a record of the past, so the solution could never be there. Free yourself from the emotion, and you will see it from a greater level of consciousness. You have to change your emotional state to get the answer. Try to get beyond the emotion. Try something, do something, show yourself what love, joy, and happiness looks like. So gang, I think that's pretty self-evident sage advice. If you're not feeling well, your thoughts are not going to be productive. So for that moment, recognize them as such and don't listen to them. If you're not feeling well, change a pattern, call a friend that you love, write a journal entry, go for a walk, get moving, listen to a song that you like, be patient with yourself. Just do what you need to do to feel better. And then once you do, your thinking will be more productive. I just want to end by saying that I want people with extreme anxiety to feel seen. Some of the strategies we discussed here might not be helpful right away. The reality is, freedom from anxiety may be harder for some than it is for others, but I promise you, it is possible for all. Trust me, if I can walk this path, so can you. I hope this new perspective proves helpful for you. At Brinth Lab, you can think of us like your personal trainers for anxiety. We can connect, we can coach you, and we look forward to getting to know you and walking this path together. I'll end on a quote that I love. Your only problem is your thinking that there is one. I'll see you in the next video. Stay strong and keep experimenting.